service here at COA Training Center. And before I get started on the topic, facts are facts, I want to again remind you, just in a few days, we're excited about John Crowder coming to be with us. That'll be the 26th. It's a Friday evening at 7. The 27th, which will be a Saturday at 2 p.m. in the afternoon and 7 p.m. at night. It'll just be Friday and Saturday. That's John Crowder that'll be with us. I've already received the books that he sent, and I can't wait for some of y'all to get them in your hands. Because I'm telling you, once you get started on those books, Chosen for Paradise, Cosmos Reborn, it will give you a paradigm shift on how you see Christianity. So tonight, the topic again is facts are facts. All right? You know, every single day we'll come up with a conversation with someone, family member, neighbor, workplace, school, whatever your situation is. But every single day, you're in a conversation. But I want to ask you, how much of it is found on facts that are true? You know, you tell someone that you've done something and they're going to up the ante. Oh, that's nothing, man. Let me tell you what I did. But is it factual? So, people speak about things every single day. I mean, I don't think there's a day that goes by that we don't talk about something. But when it comes to the truth is reality. And there are facts in this book that regardless of people believing it or rejecting it, it doesn't change the fact. Now, in my studies, I've come to the fact that it is harder to go to hell than it is to get to heaven. That's a fact. Because of the finished work of the cross, the Trinity has made it so difficult to go to hell. That's a fact. Now, I can tell you that, in my opinion, Chevy's better than Ford. But that's my opinion. Is it a fact? I'm a Chevy guy. Every truck I've ever owned is a Chevy. I like Chevys. But I can't stand up here and say, well, it's a fact, Scott, that Chevys are better than Fords. Well, can I prove it? No, I cannot. Here's another fact. Heaven and hell are both filled with believers. It's a fact. Now, those that are listening to me on Facebook, you know, listen to what I'm saying. Hell and heaven are both filled with people. Now, how can I say this? What Christ has done is included all humanity. I mean, all humanity was covered with the act of the incarnation, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. So, when you look at the facts, again, understand, heaven and hell are filled with forgiven people. Is that what I said before? Did I say something else? No. What did I say? Okay, I'm sorry. Forgiven people. Scratch that out. That's not a fact. Forgiven. Those that are in hell are forgiven. And those in heaven are forgiven. But when those that end up in hell don't believe that they were forgiven, they won't be with the Lord. Those are facts. So we're going to start off tonight in Ephesians chapter 2, starting off in verse 10. And I want you to follow with me. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. These are the Pauline epistles. The Apostle Paul wrote this to the church at Ephesus. And he says there in chapter 2, starting in verse 10, "For we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus." Now remember what we read in Colossians 1:15, that He is the firstborn of all creation. So we are God's workmanship in Christ. All of us come out of Christ. Therefore, we can say factually that because of Christ, all have been saved. But not all will accept it. That's why we have those statements of inclusion, exclusion, and universalist. Look, even if a person rejects the finished work of the cross, even if they rejected, they were still included in the finished work. So, through the work of inclusion, everybody, whether they are aware of it, whether they receive it or reject it, doesn't matter. What Christ did, He did it for all humanity. Now, how can you say that God is love, but He hates sinners? That's a contradiction. You can't say that. In other words, there's a language that exclusionists use that we can no longer use anymore. With what we have come to understand of the finished work, what we've come to understand about inclusion, that all are included in the working of the incarnation, of the crucifixion, and of the resurrection, then we cannot say that some are saved and unsaved. You can't say that. Outsiders and insiders. We can't say that. It's only two: a believer or a non-believer. That's what it boils down to. See, in exclusion, they use, again, those that are in, those that are out. Those that are saved, those that are unsaved. Another one that they use is those that are forgiven and unforgiven. That's the language of exclusion. So you mean to tell me that God came, Emmanuel, in the incarnation, only for some? You know, Joseph, when you set up your tent, all those that come to your tent, all of them are forgiven. Every single one of them. They're all forgiven. Because if you don't stand believing in inclusion, you're going to have a problem. So you have the Calvinists that believe that what Christ came to do was only for some. Now, is that love? Let's say you've got, 5 children in your family. And you can only choose 3 out of the 2 to take to heaven. I mean, come on. So Jesus said, this is how you pray. Or this is what you include in your prayer. Our Father. So if He's our Father and He's love, how can He be an exclusionist where He only chooses or picks some of humanity and rejects others? So we can't use that language anymore. Those that are outside the church, those that are inside the church, those that are forgiven, those that are not forgiven, those that are saved, those that are not saved, that language has to cease if you understand the incarnation, the crucifixion, and that of the resurrection. Because He did it for all. So, He says again, we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we would walk in them. Now, therefore, remember that you once Gentiles in the flesh, who are called of the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in the flesh by hands, that at the time you were without Christ, being aliens from that, listen now, from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. Wow. Now he's bringing all this to one. So he says there in verse 12, that at the time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope without God in the world. But now, in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off have been brought near. How? By the blood of Christ. There is no more outsider, insider, unsaved, saved, not forgiven, forgiven in our language. Not if you understand the elected God and the elected man. For the incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection. We can't use those terms anymore. So I told you, even if a person rejects the working of Christ, they're still included in it. I didn't say they're going to heaven. I didn't say they would be with the Lord forevermore. That's why I told you, both heaven and hell are filled with people or humanity that is forgiven. Even those in hell were forgiven. But they rejected the grace of God. Is everybody with me? Okay, so now, verse 14. For He Himself is our peace, who has made both one. Now, what's He talking about both? Circumcision and uncircumcision. Gentile, Jew. He's talking about what he was referring to up in verse 11. So he says, for He Himself is our peace, who has made both one, and has broken down the middle wall of separation. There is no more separation anymore. A lot of our evangelism goes out with the mentality of separation. It's them as Christians and those as, people going to hell. Look. Let me keep going here. Verse 15. Having abolished in His flesh the enmity, that is, and he explains it, the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace. Did you catch that? Verse 16. And that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross, thereby putting to death that enmity. Now, who did he do that for? He did it for everyone. Everyone that you face every single day is forgiven. But they don't know it. But then religion catches them and tells them they've got to work for what's already done. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. You've got to give this much. You know, all these things that they make a person feel. So then what do they end up doing when they fall? You know, I'm not cut out for this, man. I can't do this. This is too hard. No, they're coming to a finished work in Christ. So he takes both of them through the cross, thereby putting to death that enmity. And he came, preached peace to you who were afar off, and to those who were near. For through him we both have access by one Spirit to the Father. Man,